Hey there, welcome to Silversmithing 107. Today we're going to be setting our cabochon in the ring that we made in the previous lesson. Now for this class, obviously you're going to need the cabochon and the ring setting that we made previously, but you're also going to need a bezel pusher or burnisher. Now these come in a huge range of sizes. They come in these smaller ones here, which can be shaped to whatever size you want. These ones are set for doing smaller bezels here. This is a burnisher for burnishing or smoothing out your work when you're done. But the kind of bezel pusher that I usually like to use for larger bezels is this, and it's sometimes called a rocker or roller bezel pusher. Now, I did not include these on the original tools list for the class. These would be considered more specialty tools because they have a very specific task that each one uses. They also come in a variety of other different forms, sometimes even made out of agate or hard woods. Now, one of the ways you can actually make one of these at home using something that you probably already have is just using an old toothbrush. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So we're just going to go ahead and clamp this down here in our vise, and we're just going to cut off the handle here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shape this down a little bit with some sandpaper too. So let's take a closer look at these. This roller bezel here has a rounded end here, and the metal is smooth. And this allows me to roll it across the surface of the metal, and as it does so, it pushes the bezel down. So I've simply emulated that with my toothbrush here. I have a surface here. It is very lightly rounded, but it doesn't have to be rounded a lot. I've also removed some of this. This is a gooey, more like a rubber consistency, and that's not going to help you at all. So you want to get down to the hard plastic here. Once you have a bezel pusher, it's time to move on to the next step. Now we're going to need to figure out a way to clamp this down. So you can do this in a pan of ice quite easily, but one thing I want to show you here is that we're going to want to protect this from the jaws of our vise. So for that, I like to use a nice clean piece of leather here. And so we're just going to fold this up here, put that in there, and then bend that over the vise here, and then go ahead and finish clamping it down. And this also is going to help even out the support that the jaws of the vise hold on the stone. So not only is it really important to get this clamped down on your ring really tight because you don't want it to move, we also need to have support underneath the sides of the stone here because we're going to be pushing down on the bezel. And I'm going to put a diagram up on the screen here to show you my point. But if we push down on here, and if there's no support underneath here, then the whole thing is going to bend over to the side as we're working it, and that would be a problem. The same goes for the ends if your ring happens to go in a different orientation than mine. The leather really helps to support this quite nicely. So once you're happy with that, we can go ahead and get to setting the stone. Now there's another option besides using leather to help support your work, and that's this product here. This is called Jet Set. There's a few other types of it on the market, but essentially it's a thermoplastic. This right here is very, very hard. It comes in these little pellets here. And you simply grab a handful of them, you put it in some water, you put it in a cup, you pour boiling water over the top of it, and after it's heated up, maybe 30 seconds to about a minute, it becomes malleable. So then you can form it around your workpiece and attach it to your vise in order to completely support your workpiece when you're working. And I do this all the time with more complicated or intricate pieces that are difficult to support with a vise. But it's also an option if you're working on an exceptionally large piece that is difficult to support with the vise alone. Now, if you haven't already, it's time to examine the inside of our bezel here. What we're looking for is any excess solder that may be here in the seam. You may recall that in our bezel making video where we were selecting our bezel wire and examining the profile of our cabochon, we were looking to see if we had a beveled edge here, like mine does. Now, if you're a lapidary artist, you're at an advantage because you can go ahead and add that to your cabochon. If your cabochon does not have a beveled edge, it's really important at this stage you go ahead and clean up any excess solder whatsoever. And to do this, you're going to want to use a burr like this. This will sit in here real flat, and you'll be able to go all the way around the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that to show you how to do this. Even though my cabochon does not have a straight edge, it has a beveled one. One of the added advantages of the toothbrush is that you can use it to clean your work as you go. And you got a bezel pusher on the other end. Okay. Now that is really important, and I'm going to throw up this other video or this other diagram on the screen here to show you why that is so necessary, and also to make sure there's just no lumps and your whole thing is even. And that's because if you were to put this in here, I'm going to go ahead and drop mine in. And that's in there nice and firm. If there was any lump under any part of the stone, under the edge, then the stone would only be contacting the back under 2 points of contact, and it would be high at one point where there was a lump, and then at the other side where it had sloped downward was touching the other end. The problem is that then as I start to push down on the bezel on the two opposite sides, the stone is going to want to crack right down the middle. And we don't want anybody to cry on their first day of silversmithing here. So we're going to shoot for a stone that doesn't break. So now that you've got this in here, make sure there's not any dust or shavings around there. Go ahead and take your bezel pusher here, and you want to start at the corners. Now we don't have any corners, so what we're going to start at is the closest thing to a corner, which would be wherever the radius is the tightest. So it's tempting to start on the easy side, but you want to start on the side where you're going to have to do the most amount of bending. So I'm going to hold this bezel pusher at about a 45-degree angle, push gently, and slowly turn it around the corner here. Now don't feel like you need to push it all the way over until it touches the stone on the first pass. Then I'm going to go around to the other side here and do the same thing. The advantage of the softer toothbrush here is that it's not marring my finish, but it is pushing the bezel over. I'm going to go all the way around. Here's a new view so you can get an overhead view. I'm going to go ahead and loosen up my pan of ice because I'm right-handed. I'm going to go ahead and switch to my normal bezel rocker here. And this allows me to rotate this more freely so I can have the side that I want to push on always on the right-hand side. And I'm just going to go ahead and just keep rocking this around the edge here. I'm also going to grab my optivisor so I have some magnification here. And you don't want to try to push too much all at once. If you try to do that, you're going to end up with something that looks kind of like a paper plate you get at the 4th of July picnic. It's going to have a crinkled edge to it, which we all know that's how you get paper plates to fold up at the sides, is you have to crinkle the edge. The nice thing about metal is that if you go at it slowly, the metal actually moves internally and reshapes itself to match the shape that you're trying to push it into. So it won't crinkle. The other thing to keep in mind is that as you work metal, it slowly work hardens. And so you're trying to be efficient with your movement and push as much as you can each time, but not overdoing it to the point where you crinkle. The problem is if you take too long and you do this too many rounds, the metal gets stiffer and stiffer, and it becomes more springy and bounces back instead of lying right where you push it. And so you want it to be in this annealed state where it's malleable and not at all springy. So that at this point, it's staying right in the position that I push it to without springing back at all. And that's really important for a bezel, because if you keep pushing on it and it keeps springing back, it just gets really difficult to get a good finish on here. Bezel slips and mars up your bezel. Don't worry. Or say if your bezel pusher slips, mars up your metal. Don't worry, you can buff that out after you're all done. After I've gotten all the way around at about a 45-degree angle, I like to go ahead and tip my bezel pusher up to more like about 60 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up here by burnishing the edge of the bezel with a burnisher. And this just pushes it down that last little tenth of a millimeter, and also applies a mirror finish. So I have this polished to a very fine finish, and that imparts a very fine finish on the edge of my bezel wire here. Which is important because then I won't have to go back and try to polish that tiny little edge without hitting the stone. Some stones will handle that just fine. They can be polished with normal buffing wheels and so forth. Other stones, not so much. Now, if you find a spot that's not all the way pushed over, you just have to go back and manually push that down here with your rocker. Going for a very uniform finish here. I probably spend more time pushing my bezels over than a lot of people do, but I also feel pretty strongly that how that bezel edge looks on your stone is a really big indicator of the overall quality of your work and your attention to detail. So I just feel like it's worth taking that extra 5 minutes or so and making sure it just looks really straight and even. I think it's the sort of thing people notice. Maybe it's just me. And if you see little bits of dust, try to get them out from underneath the bezel, because they wouldn't seem like they'd be much, but they can prevent the bezel from lying flat. So in order to determine if your stone is in here snug, you're going to tap it. If you hear a second click, hear that? It's a click. That click means that when I tap it on this side, it goes down. That click means that it's not sitting even. So one of these sides, you can test this by going back and forth, is not as far down as I need it to be. So just going to keep on looking at that. Clicking is also another telltale sign that whoever set the stone didn't take the time to really make sure it was totally secure. Now, some silversmiths will do something, but I don't like to do this. They'll put cardboard or sawdust under a stone. And what that does is it effectively it's like putting a spring under your stone. It's constantly pushing out because it wants to expand. It's pushing the stone up against the bezel. So it helps to eliminate that clicking. But I feel like if you want to eliminate the clicking, you just need to get your bezel down nice and tight. The other problem with cardboard and sawdust is that eventually it loses its springiness, and then you have a cabochon that is very loose It can also absorb moisture, and having been the one to repair rings with sawdust under the stone, I can tell you it's pretty gross if it's been there for a while. So just keep working at it until you can get rid of the clicks. And once you're happy with it, we can go ahead and remove it from the vise. You can see here my bezel has very little marring on it. Almost no touch-up would be required at this point, aside from the one spot where my rocker slipped off the edge. So I'm just going to touch that up on the buffing wheel real fast. So when I want to polish up a bezel, I'm going to use a hard rubberized polishing wheel. And these come in lots of different grits, lots of different brands, but they're all basically the same. The polishing compound is imbued in this rubbery compound, and it slowly wears away as you use it. They come in these flat edges, they come in knife edges, and they come in barrels. And this is going to allow me to put the polish exactly where I want it and nowhere else. So I don't have to worry about the stone. I don't have to worry about, well, basically the stone at this point. So let's go ahead and chuck this in here and just take out that one little mark real fast. All right, I am quite happy with the way my ring turned out. I hope you are too. If this gave you any trouble at all, don't worry. Bezel setting is definitely one of those acquired skills, and it does take practice to get really good at it. And it's probably one of the most discussed topics that I see among new silversmiths online and a lot of the forums I'm a part of. So keep at it, keep trying, and just remember some of the tips that I gave you. If you do have questions, just leave me a comment below. I do read them and I appreciate them, and I will always try to reply whether I have a good answer or not. In the next few videos, we're going to be making another ring, and we're going to be adding a prong mounting to it and then setting a faceted gemstone into that prong mounting. So stay tuned.